Well, done some work on the offensive line. Just how do you feel about what you guys have been able to do here with these two waves of free agency?
Good so far. Obviously, still a lot of work to be done. I think, as we look specifically with that offensive line group, good players, but also very versatile. And particularly like with Elton and Titus, both of those guys are players who can, play at a quality starting level at multiple positions across the offensive line. And that's super helpful because it really is a war of attrition with that position group. I think something like we looked at it as either 23 or 24 teams last year played less than 50% with their starting five. Of course, we were one of them. And so to have that resiliency built into a position group where you have guys that can start all across the line of scrimmage, it's really important, in addition to the flexibility it gives you going into the draft.
So where are you playing Elton Jenkins?
Yeah, so it's TBD. He's honestly like, he can play center, he can play guard. That's something that we're going to sort out as we get at least a little bit further through the acquisition season. This is a guy who's played, starting level snaps at left tackle, right tackle, left guard, center. He can really do it all. We would view him more as an interior player. That is what we think is more his natural home. Whether it's center or whether it's guard, we'll work through that as we put together the position for the spring.
As you talk about that versatility piece, how important is that going to be for how you guys approach potentially drafting, looking at alignment in the draft?
Yeah, it gives flexibility. That's probably the biggest thing. Like, we feel good if we had to line up and play today that we could, with that group of linemen, but it certainly doesn't pigeonhole you into anything as you get to draft league.
Well, who would be your center today?
Today, hard to say. Like, honestly, it really depends on the competition at really one of the other guard spots opposite Zion. Obviously, we have Elton. We re-signed Tevin. Zach and Luke, they're guys that are going to have greater opportunity now that those vets are gone. So it's really we would just be looking for the best pairs. Just that pair.
Yeah, finish that thought. So Zach finished playing center. Is he earmarked? Compete at center?
You mean Luke? Do you mean Luke? Zach really finished playing guard for us. You mean Luke finished playing center for a Posick?
Well, Luke got hurt in the Cincy game, and Zach finished center.
Zach's more natural position is guard. He can do both, but
competitor for center.
I would say this. Well, he can do both. We think his more natural position is a guard. Is that fair enough to say? Yeah.
Andrew, since this was such a hot topic over the last few days or so, can you address what was the impetus behind the Myles Garrett contract modifications, and then also, of course, the corollary to that is everybody thinks you're going to trade him. So if you could talk about those two issues.
Yeah. So I think you guys know, like standard practice, I don't comment on player contracts. I guess probably the easiest thing to say is if we wanted to trade Myles, we wouldn't have needed to make a contract adjustment. So it doesn't have anything to do with that.
Why did you do it?
So again, I don't comment on player contracts. I understand the question and the interest, but it's just something that we've always felt not to comment on player contracts or contract management strategy.
So can you state unequivocally that you're not trading Myles Garrett?
I'd say this, Mary Kay. Myles is a career Brown. He is one of the faces of our organization. I think we've been very clear, both past and present, in terms of our feelings of that. So I understand all the questions. I'll be honest, I don't really want to waste a ton more breath on the topic.
Yeah. Sure. But you feel like you guys are in a good spot with Myles?
We do.
Yeah.
As it pertains to the quarterback position, is it just safe to assume that the incumbents, the current room, will be competing for the starting position? Or when you look to add a potential fourth quarterback, would you prefer the draft? Would you prefer signing a vet free agency? Or how are you kind of looking at the quarterback room as it stands?
Yeah, I'd say, Daniel, that you always want to be flexible because you don't know how circumstances change or what opportunities come your way. Our lean would be, if we do add someone to the quarterback room, it would be someone who's a younger player, most likely. But I can't state that definitively because I don't know what the next couple of weeks will hold. Anyone that we bring in at any spot on the roster, our thought is that they are competing to play. They have something that we like in their skill set, and our expectation would be for them to work hard.
Andrew, with regards to the Shedeur versus Deshaun specifically, how much do you balance short-term with long-term, knowing that team control with Shedeur goes well beyond 26, whereas Deshaun there is sort of another hurdle that it creates.
Yeah, I think we're probably just more focused on performance in best players. Certainly, time horizon factors into that. But just of any veteran player, there's no rule against extending the player's contract if they perform and they do work. So I wouldn't necessarily box it into any, one approach. It really will be performance based.
Andrew, I understand how do you value Miles. Everyone knows he's the best player in the league. But you have the team to consider too. So why don't you think you could get out of this hole by using your greatest asset? Collect picks.
Yeah, which we'll always do what we think is in the best interest of the organization. We really like our core. I mean, I think as we look at the team, we have an elite young defense. We have a really, rebuilt offensive line. We have 9 picks this upcoming draft, and I think 7 are in the top 150. 3 in the top 40. We have a good offensive young core that we brought in last year. And honestly, as we saw last year, there are more than one way to generate assets in NFL. So we'll always do what's best for the organization, but we feel really good at our roster right to head to the draft.
At the Combine, you kind of were 50-50. I mean, it almost seemed like Deshaun and Shedeur, you were totally fine with either one of them if it worked out that one of them were the start. Is it still where you stand right now? Does it sort of still seem like they each have an equal opportunity to win the starting job?
Yeah, I'd say as we sit here on, March 29th and nobody has touched the grass, nobody has really worked with our coaching staff. I wouldn't handicap it for anyone. I think everyone in that room deserves opportunity. And so we'll certainly know a lot more as we get to the spring. We'll know even more as we get to camp. But I think, honestly, we wouldn't be doing the right thing for the team. We wouldn't be doing the right thing for that position if we didn't go in with it eyes wide open.
What was the impetus to expanding the scope on trading draft picks? Did you see the reaction to it, and do you expect it to pass?
Yeah, so Daniel, in terms of the impetus, we've largely been believers in, easing restrictions in terms of how teams can use their resources. So this is in a similar vein, and really just giving more flexibility to teams in terms of volume and creativity of transactions. As we look at it, our league relative to the other major leagues, the basketball you can trade, pick 7 years out. Hockey, I don't think there's any limitation. Obviously, baseball is the most restricted, but you can't trade picks at all. To us, 3 years is really probably more of an arbitrary, marker in terms of how far out you can, deploy your future assets. Honestly, Daniel, I think a lot of the, perhaps resistance is this idea that, a desperate general manager, a desperate head coach could, leverage a team's, future irresponsibly. I think that's a little bit more rooted in fear than reality, though. And I think for 2 reasons. I think number one, there is always ownership oversight for every franchise. But 2, probably the bigger point, if you look back over the last 10 years, I think there have been 27 trades that have included a pick 3 years out. And of those 27, only 3 have included a first rounder, and only another 4 have included even day 2 picks. So I don't think you're all of a sudden going to see this trend where people are trading picks, 4 or 5 years out. I think those are very rare circumstances. But what it does do is it gives you more creative alternatives for, I would say, maybe less signature or less aggressive moves because of how you want to balance the discounting of present versus future assets.
Is there a rigid rule now? There seems to be confusion. Is it an NFL rule you can only trade in 3 years out? Is it more of an udders?
No, it's a rule.
Yeah, that's a rule.
So if you were the receiving GM of a trade, how do you devalue a pick 3 years in advance?
Yeah, so
number one.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Tony. So traditionally, I'd say, let me back up. Every team probably has their own methodology. Probably the traditional discounting is you discount it around. Now there will be varying opinions of if that's an effective, valuation of future picks. But I think that's what actually creates some unique transactional opportunities because teams will value present versus future picks much differently. And it just gives you more opportunities for creative solutions that benefit both sides.
And when you talk about the quarterback situation, how realistic is it that you will add somebody? You said it would probably be a younger guy. How realistic is it that you would add somebody that would actually come in here and compete for the starting job? And then the corollary to that is just how realistic is it that you would draft Ty Simpson at some point?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with the first question. I think it's wholly realistic, Mary Kay. In terms of them competing for the starting job, anyone we bring in, we want to compete. But a large part of that will be, for any young player, will depend on their acclimation to the NFL and their readiness to play. And that's really done on a case-by-case basis. In terms of Ty specifically, I think you can understand we wouldn't necessarily comment on specific prospects. We have spent time with Ty. I think that's obvious, and we'll continue to do so. But I think he has a bright NFL future.
Last year, you were very visible at the quarterback pro days. This year, you're not. Why?
I think just every year you see Tony. Both where you're picking, the particular class, the access that you have, particular individuals. But we also do have was one a month out for the draft, so there still is a lot of work to do.
Yeah, the pro days are done.
Yep,
that's for Indiana's.
Yeah. So Tony, I think actually like last year, most of our trips were actually privates as opposed to the pro days. So I wouldn't say that's the only touch point.
Yeah, but you went to the pro day and then you stayed over for the visit.
So that's actually not
true. That's not.
Yeah. We did.
Certainly were at the Travis Hunters and Shadors.
That was the only one.
Oh, I'll be back. Obviously, still no official answer from Joel in terms of what his decision is going to be. Do you guys feel you kind of have to operate from a place of where you can't bank on him coming back? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Joel's going to take the time that he needs to, make the decision for the next step in his career, and like he should, right? It's a pretty big life decision for him. I don't think that we can operate under the assumption that he's absolutely coming back because he hasn't said that space, and I do think that there's a little bit of like a definite time period in terms of where he's going to make that decision because it's a major one for a person, and we respect that and can appreciate it.
But is the door open? Like, do you still want him back? Given you guys obviously let the dead money kind of accelerate on your cap this year, so and there might have been a way you could have somewhere maybe maneuvered that if you could have done it differently. So is it still like the open door for him to return?
Yeah, I'd say the door's always open for good players. Certainly, players who've done as much as what that Joel has for the organization, but ultimately it's his decision in terms of how he wants to navigate things before.
You hold pick 6, and externally everybody's guessing on 2 to 5. Are you guys guessing too?
You mean like who it might who's going? Gotcha. Yeah. So as we get into April, Zach, we'll do a lot of scenario planning, and we'll get into those. We'll get into those exercises. I'd say right now we're still more towards the end of the evaluation phase. Especially as like the pro days die down, the privates die down. A little bit of like touch up film work, but here over the next month we'll get into that more heavily.
Who makes the call quarterback? Is it an organizational decision or is that Todd's call strictly?
In terms of start, that's always been the head coach's decision. Yeah, whoever is playing on the field, that's always the head coach's decision. Yeah.
Andrew, what's going on at wide receiver so far? You've just added a return specialist.
Yeah, I'd say that we have a group of individuals that we like internally, that we're excited to see as they come back into the offseason program. I would imagine that at some point in the offseason, we'll add some external talent. But like I said, we're March 29th. We've got probably another 5 months in the heaviest period of the acquisition season. So we'll see where it goes.
How aggressively did you pursue veteran wide receivers and even veteran quarterbacks? And maybe why or why not did you pursue it aggressively?
I would not necessarily go into those details, Daniel, but I understand the interest. I'd say this. Our focus primarily was on the offensive line, obviously, going into pre-agency, while still maintaining an opportunistic mindset at some of the other spots. I think the great thing about the NFL is you have a number of different, spigots you could turn on in terms of, player acquisition, whether it's the draft, whether it's free agency, whether it's the trade market. So it's about pouring those levers of it right down.
Specifically about Shedeur, you have mentioned at the end of the season, Todd has mentioned that he still has a long way to go. How far does he have to go to get to the point where you guys would feel comfortable putting his hands right from the start?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit TBD, Mary Kay, because I think all of our guys coming in, they're going to learn a new offensive system. We're going to have a fair amount of turnover on that side of the ball to have new teammates to learn, which is why the spring will be really important for the guys that are at the offseason program for us to really, really get a sense of their progress year over year. But, he's been working really hard. I would expect him to take a step forward, and, we'll deal with that kind of week by week and month by month.
You said you prefer a younger fourth quarterback. Does that mean draft pick only or a younger veteran?
I wouldn't say, I would not, I wouldn't rule out any method of acquisition. Yeah.
What would an 18th game being added mean to your job? And how would you view that?
I'll be honest, Zach, I don't think it would have a huge difference other than, I'd probably be most curious how injury rates change more than anything. Like, I could see a world where at certain positions, maybe it changes your approach for your depth. But I'd also imagine that 18th game would come with some type of trade-off, whether it's a bye week or less preseason games or things like that. But in terms of, I guess, maybe the fundamental aspects of the roster building, I don't think it would have a major impact.
So along those lines, but I'll figure out how I want to ask this, kind of open it. You guys have had to play 12 quarterbacks in 3 years. Mm-hmm. League-wide, I think it was 62 last year and 59 the year before that. It's a wild number. Is that inevitable? Is that something that can be fixed? Like, just what's your thoughts on all of those quarterbacks playing?
Yeah.
Does it change your plan? Does it have to change your plan?
No, I'd say this. I think probably you could put it in two different buckets, like durability versus performance at that position. And part of it is like if you're turning over room, you're probably going to have a little bit more opportunity, or at least more, like, not even just relative to quarterbacks. I do think the durability component is real, because that's a very physically and mentally demanding position in our sport, especially as D linemen become that much bigger, that much faster, that much stronger. And it's a big reason that we believed in carrying 3, because it is a very long season. And I don't see that part changing anytime soon.
Coming off about that durability, but to the offensive line more specifically, when you kind of gone back and looked at the last 3 years, have you adjusted anything based off of kind of re-examining the last 3 years? Is there the injuries? What has kind of led to it? And kind of what have you guys learned from, studying the amount of turnover you guys have had on the line?
Yeah. So I think, number one, it's fairly prevalent across the league. Like, probably keeping a position group of 5 players all on the field the whole season is probably fairly unrealistic. That's one thing that we've learned. 2, I think if you look at where we were, take out the 25 season, the 24-23 in terms of our injury rates, it's a big reason that we made some of the changes that we did in the health and performance spaces. And we really started to see those returns, this year in terms of keeping those guys on the field. To that group specifically, I think probably this past year, really a big part of it was, that group really did age out for us. And we understood that we were going in with a little bit of an older group there. I do think that as we turn over that room, I think or hope that some of that will take care of itself, in addition to some of the changes that we've made in downstairs in the healthy performance spaces.
Just following up real quick, but you sort of look at like DeJuan's was a fluke, see a lot of them as kind of flukish the way they happen.
I think it's a combination of both. Like, I think it's a combination of guys who you understand, like, you're going to have guys on your roster that have some type of medical history. Like, you're not going to build a team of unfortunately all durable guys. Some certainly are flukes in the sense of, hey, is it a contact injury? Does someone get thrown to somebody's knees or legs? And some of it may be like hey guys, their injury risk does change as their career progresses, whether it's because of their age or it's because of previous injuries. So I'd like to sit here and say it's like, hey, it's just one thing and then it's an easy cure all, but I think that would be unfair to say.
I think a year ago it was at the owners' meetings where the trade from 2 to 5 really kind of started to come about with James Gladstone. A year later, how do you reflect on that trade? Maybe what you got, from the rookies in the short term, and also like the long term outlook, as well as how the trade has kind of set you up for this upcoming draft.
Yeah, I think it's something that made sense for both organizations at the time. I think for us, the ability to, realistically draft Mason, draft Q, and then obviously be sitting here with pick 24. It made sense for where we are in our team's life cycle. And it's a way, maybe a little bit to Tony's question earlier, that you're able to manufacture assets or resources without necessarily, trading away a veteran player. So it was an opportunity that came about, and we were fortunate for what we were trying to achieve. And we do think that it puts us in a good position with what we've also added already this year.
Next field teams are reluctant to give up 27 picks this year because of the quality.
I wouldn't say so, because I think, so I want to think, like, what is it? 6 teams have 2 firsts this year, or something along those lines. I can't remember how many have given up their 27 picks, but I think there will be a market for those 27 picks if I had to guess.
And do you want to be in that mark?
Hey, listen, we can have more premium assets. It's helpful. I think you can look back to last year, like, there are some really good players in last year's draft, the top of last year's draft. We felt like we got one to win at last year's draft, and by moving back 3 spots, essentially to get a 1 and a 2 would made sense for us.
So in a perfect world, would you trade down from number 6 in this draft? And then I have a follow-up question.
I think it really just depends on the prospects that are available. I'd like to say, look, this is what I would say. I don't know that, but I'll tell you guys this is, I don't know that we are going to be picking 6 at the end of April. And if we are picking 6, I have no idea what we're going to take at this point. And so we try and remain flexible, as we go into draft weekend, and we want to use the asset in the best way possible, whether that's sitting and picking, trading up, trading down, trading it for a veteran player. I know I said this last year and people thought it was just GM talk, but it really is the truth.
And the follow-up,
I don't ever do just GM talk.
The follow-up to that is, do you think there is a world in which you can secure another first-round pick for next year?
I'm sure that world exists. I don't know the specifics of it today.
So far, you've only had one offensive lineman visit to Berea, reportedly.
I'd say I'd say this, Tony. I would not. Can't believe everything you read.
So you have had,
Well, I think we've actually had a lot. So
a lot of offense, but
Tell us who some of the other ones.
I'd prefer not to.
Are you guys that remote in the league know each other's visits?
No, that's not. So you have to report it to like the local office.
Overfootball.com.
But no, it's not like you'd see whoever keeps 30 for this hour. No, yeah.
Last year, you guys did a lot of dinners there. Does this off private workouts? Is it more in your building this year with the draft prospects?
I wouldn't say that's necessarily the case. Like the volume's down a little bit, but we still had our fair share. So.
Off of Daniel kind of mentioned the trade last year, sort of starting maybe at this time of year. Would you say this year it's less likely that comes to fruition before draft weekend like the way it did last year, just because of the nature of where you guys are versus where you were drafted last year?
That's a great question. I wouldn't say that's it's a very reasonable conclusion, but I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the case.
How does the multitude of teams that have multiple first round picks, obviously including yourselves, how does that kind of change the dynamic of the first round, maybe flexibility with trades and how you kind of prepare and maneuver?
I actually don't think it changes it that much, Daniel. Maybe I'll be wrong once we get to draft weekend, but I don't think that's really had a major impact.
So you don't think that it'd be easier or harder to treat? Because
No, I don't. Really.
When you're looking at these quarterbacks in this draft, there seems to be a lot of, not a lot of reps in terms of scheme starter. Nussmeier, there's questions of health and that, how much did that impact? How much, when you're evaluating these guys, how much are you weighing those kind of extra things?
Context is important for any prospect, and that's not just the quarterback position, but probably particularly strong for the QB position because it's so interdependent on everything else, around it. Those absolutely, weigh into both the evaluation and then the final valuation in terms of, okay, where do you value the particular prospect? So it's something we absolutely take into account.
Most GMs don't go to pro days like you. Why don't you go? Basically, what's your philosophy on that?
Yeah, I'd say that.
Like Ohio State.
Yeah, so I'd say number one, every GM probably has their own process. Number two, as a general manager, you're not the personnel director. You're overseeing the entire football operation. That's certainly a part of it. Probably the bigger thing is I'd say a lot of us that maybe don't hit the pro day circuit go out a lot in the fall and see these guys. For me, the biggest part of the pro day is if you haven't seen a guy, let's say, move around live, or let's say it's a prospect that you're going to have play in another role or another position, maybe you get to see that in the workout. But for someone that you've seen multiple times in the fall, you've seen them live and you've seen them at the combine, work out. The question is okay, you only have so much time. How additive can that actually be? And then the other thing is they're always all on film as well. So, every pro day that's out there, you get on film.
What about talking to trainers and equipment?
So you should be doing that fall.
Okay, you do that. You do that.
The fall should be doing that in the fall.
When you talk about rebuilding and the cycle of your roster, what can fans expect in terms of your ability to contend for the playoffs this year?
Yeah, I think we're way too early for that discussion because we are 2 weeks into the new league year. So we've got a long way to go until, we complete the roster before week 1. So that really will be the focus, and then we can talk about that once we get to.
So you mentioned you could consider Jenkins a center or guard. So who's your left tackle? Other than DeJuan Jones, you don't have an alternative, right?
Yeah. I'd say, between DeJuan, Titus has obviously played there before, was Cause left tackle as well. We've had KT. So we do have options there, Tony.
is it DeJuan an option so I could potentially move inside, or do you view him restricted?
No, I was viewing him as it's strictly as a tackle. Yeah.
And are you still reasonably sure or completely 100% sure that Quinshon, I know he'll be ready for the season, but will he be 100% ready for training camp, or where does that?
Yeah, he's progressing really, really nicely. I'd imagine that we're going to see him in some form or fashion this spring. And, knock on wood, he should be full clear for camp.
Is his case closed with the league?
I'm sorry?
Is his case closed with the league? Is there still any thought of a potential?
Nope. There's no issues.
Before DeJuan got hurt, moved back to right tackle. Is that his home now?
No, not necessarily. Yeah.
Do you agree with the consensus on this wide receiver class being pretty deep? And I guess off of that, how does that kind of impact how you approach that position where maybe you don't feel like you have to, force the issues super early if you can get value rated?
Well, I think that I don't believe in drafting for E, period. I don't probably the best example last year is I don't know that many people had us pegged to take Carson with the 33rd pick, but that worked out pretty well for us. So that regardless of how deep or shallow it is, that really doesn't play a huge role into our thinking.
I think when you it's fair to say the quarterback that the Deshaun contract hasn't gone away. You guys thought that it would. With 1 year left, there's obviously a lot of strong emotions tied to Deshaun by the fan base. What is the benefit to going through this all over?
Yeah, I'd say for us, the biggest thing I mentioned a little bit earlier, our charge is to put the best team on the field, and ultimately it comes down to performance. Any player that we have on the roster, we expect to compete. That's what we've looked for.
It seems like this draft class of tackles, there's a lot of right tackles, and the number of true left tackles, it seems to vary. Do you believe that? Or I know you believe, a tackle is a tackle in a lot of ways, but do you feel like there's the depth of true left tackles is shallower maybe than
I don't. And I think the distinction between right and left tackles in today's game, like the job descriptions they're identical. It's not like 25 years ago where you had an open side rusher, a closed side rusher, you had right-handed formations. I mean, think about how we use Miles, right? Like, I don't know that, hey, if you're the left tackle, you're getting Myles Garrett matchup all the time. The right tackle got to be able to block him too. So I just think those lines have blurred pretty significantly, in modern day football. And you think about it, you have Tristan Wirfs, who went from the right side to the left side. You hear Detroit talking about moving Sewell from the right side to the left side. Tyron Smith was a career right tackle in college and high school, moved to the left side. And then the other way, you have plenty of left tackles. Jack Conklin was a left tackle in college and moved to the right side. So I just think those distinctions are a little bit outdated.
So you think that you could get a starting caliber wide receiver or a left tackle at 24?
We'll see. We're not far enough along in our evaluations to say.
Martin Emerson, your thoughts?
Yeah, love MJ. Absolutely love MJ, both as a person and as a player. Selfishly would love to have him back. I think we're also realistic that, with MJ and the injury that he's coming off of, to reach his, personal goals, he's also got to be in a position where he has maybe a strong opportunity to compete for a starting spot. That's probably a little bit harder with how we're configured with Denzel and Tyson. But certainly if that changes in terms of press, we'd love to have him back.
In the same vein that everyone wants to speculate that you guys might trade Myles, I see the same thing for Denzel everywhere. And I'm guessing that falls into the same bucket, that he's one of your core players and he's not going in.
Yeah, I mean, we'll always do what's best for the organization, but we're generally in the business of keeping elite players as opposed to shipping them.
I know the NFLPA came out with its report card again that leaked in. I think for the first time they had GM grades. And you personally got to see. I was curious. That's all that he saw, you looked at, was that discussed? How do you?
It is now. That's how it news to me.
I was just curious, how do you kind of I don't know what the criteria was, but
I don't either.
I guess so. When it comes to player satisfaction and these the relationships, how do you kind of go about fostering that and making sure that you're on good terms?
We're pretty good about developing daily interpersonal interaction with our players. So that's not something that I would ever need to see or whatever, or with a report card. I know a lot's been raining out that, but we feel good about our guys.
Has the organization chart changed with DePodesta leaving? So does the head coach report to you or the owner?
So head coach reports into general manager.
So that is a change.
I guess. I mean, it's not something that we really only spend a lot of time thinking about, Tony. We work to get it. Yeah.
How about, can you just comment on the job that Todd has done so far? How are you guys working together? What do you think of the staff that he's built, and what are you seeing just for Turchies?
Todd's awesome. I think you guys have experienced it with your interactions with him. He's really smart. He's authentic. He's hired an excellent staff. He's great to work with, and I think we're both really excited to get going on April 7th when we get back. But I feel very, very strongly that as you all, our fans, continue to see him work and in interaction with him, that he will very much endear himself to his fan base.
Gunnar, how beneficial is that you can start those workouts 2 weeks earlier? For the guys coming back in the cup seat, it's still just voluntary workouts, but being able to have guys back in the building with this coaching staff.
It's really helpful, Kelsey, and it's a little bit of a crunch, beforehand, because you're like, oh man, the offseason is coming quickly. But then once you get into it, one, there's a natural excitement when the guys come back in the building. Two, the extra time that they get, familiarizing themselves with the new staff. It's excellent. So it's an opportunity that we do not take lightly.
Will Myles participate, do you know, in the off-season program this year?
It's a voluntary program, so I'd imagine he'd do his same schedule, that type of thing.